to talk today about a book that I recently wrote with Catherine D'Ignazio, who couldn't be here today, but she is, this is what she looks like. She's an assistant professor of urban science and planning at MIT. And I should just say, if you're interested in the book, either now or after the end of the talk, you can actually read it online. It's available open access through this URL, datafeminism.io. So I thought what I would do today is talk a little bit about sort of our motivation for writing the book, which hopefully will resonate with many of the listeners. And then towards the end of my time, I'll summarize a little bit about what to actually, what, as you can tell by the title, Data Feminism is a book about what feminism can contribute to data science. And I think some people, when they hear the title, they think, I'm not really sure how, what, huh? But hopefully by the end of the talk, you'll see sort of what we were thinking, and better yet, you'll believe it. So we see our book as contributing to a growing body of work that is together and collectively holding corporate and government actors accountable for sexist, racist, classist data products. So you could think of things like face detection systems that can't see women of color, hiring algorithms that demote applicants that went to all women's schools, search algorithms that circulate negative stereotypes about Black girls. You could think about the recent A-levels fiasco in the UK, all of these things and more. But what we bring to this conversation is this focus on feminism and intersectional feminism in particular. And before I sort of get to the main argument of the book about why data science needs feminism, I wanted to do just a very quick bit of level setting about just a little bit of level setting. So everyone, when they hear the term feminism, sort of brings their own definition to the table. So we thought that we would tell you about ours. So one definition comes actually from Beyonce. Feminist, the person who believes in equal rights for men and women and trans people. And here's a second definition: feminism, organized activity on behalf of women and trans people's rights and interests. So feminism in this definition is also a political action. But feminism is also a set of theories and ideas. These theories began by thinking through issues of inequality with respect to sex and gender. But over the past 40 years, both sort of in the academy and then just reality, have made people realize that there need to be many, many more dimensions of inequality in conversation with each other. So these include sex and gender, but also race, class, sexual orientation, ability, and more. And this leads to the most important takeaway just from the sort of brief intro on feminism, which is that when you're talking about feminism in the year 2020, it must be understood as intersectional. And this is a term coined by the legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, which she uses to explain how social inequality cannot be defined by only one dimension of difference like gender. So when we're talking about inequality or oppression, we must be talking about the intersection of the many factors and forces that produce it. So racism, classism, imperialism, and so on. And the really key thing to understand about intersectionality, and this is actually something that's often overlooked, is that intersectionality doesn't just describe markers of individual identity and their effects. It describes the structural forces of power, sort of the root cause of these inequalities and their intersection that create the effects that we experience. And it's really the work of women of color feminists and Black feminists in particular that have foregrounded this conversation about structural forces. So just to sort of summarize this idea of intersectional feminism, which provides us with the underlying framework for our book, it's not just about women, it's not just about gender, it's at its core about power. It's about who has power and who doesn't. And in today's world, data is power. And so intersectional feminism, when applied to data science, can help that power be challenged and changed. And our argument in the book is really that data science needs feminism, and intersectional feminism in particular, if we ever hope to overturn these power imbalances that we experience in our data sets and our data systems. So that's a little bit of the background about the book and our rationale for writing it. But what the book actually contains is these 7 principles of data feminism. And what Catherine and I did is we, sat down and sort of asked ourselves, what have we learned from all of our schooling in feminism, all of our experience in various activist communities and other sort of community groups that we've been a part of. And we came up with these 7 principles that to us encapsulate the most important aspects of intersectional feminism as they relate to data. And our goal here was really to operationalize feminism for data science. So to provide models that might guide the people working with data or who want to work with data, or people who want to refuse to work with data. So I'm just in the second half of the talk going to do 3 just quick examples. So you get the sense of what we mean by these principles and how we see them play out in, again, sort of data sets, data systems, and data products. So in the book, we tell the story of Mimi Onuoha's efforts to collect what she calls missing data sets. These are data sets that a reasonable person might expect to exist, like the number of citizens killed by the police, or the number of women versus men with cases of coronavirus. But these data sets do not exist. And what Onuoha does is undertake an analysis of power. This is the first principle of data feminism in her art project, to ask why, for instance, we have detailed data on things like the length of guinea pig teeth, which we do, but we don't have data on police violence. But feminism also involves action, if you can remember that second definition of feminism. And so in the chapter about challenging power, we also describe ways to push back against unequal power structures in the data systems that we encounter. For example, the issue of feminicide in Mexico, and actually in pretty much every other country. This is another case of missing data sets. And in the book, we tell the story of one woman, Maria Salguero, who resolved to head straight towards this problem and collect the missing data herself. And this is what might be called a feminist counter data collection strategy. So collecting counter data in the absence of state or government or institutional desire or will to collect data on an important issue. So if the state fails to collect data, you can collect counter data in order to challenge that power. And there's sort of lots of caveats about the good that data collection can do, because it's certainly not true that more data is always better in all cases. But for the issue, for time's sake, I'm going to leave it there. But feminism doesn't just help us identify issues to address. It also informs the process of data science work. In this principle, embracing pluralism derives from the feminist philosopher Donna Haraway's idea of situated knowledge. This is her view that the most complete knowledge comes from bringing together multiple perspectives. So in this model, knowledge is not top down, actually not like me just lecturing at you, but is actually created through dialogue and exchange. And her argument, which we believe, is this ultimately results in a more complete picture of the problem at hand. And we see this in the example of the anti-eviction mapping project. This is this large image that you see on the left. It's also known as the AEMP. And they are a self-described collective of, quote, housing justice activists, researchers, data nerds, artists, and oral historians. And since 2013, the AEMP has worked to quantify and organize around the housing crisis in San Francisco, that's in the Bay Area in the United States, where Silicon Valley is. And it's been a real problem over the years of people working for tech companies coming in, making high salaries, the rents going up, and everyone else being kicked out. And so this group works in collaboration with tenants' rights organizations and community groups. And then they also actually create oral histories, which is what you see here, this little screenshot right here, in this narratives of resistance and displacement map. So on this map, each of the blue dots that you see leads to a video story from a single person or a family who is facing displacement from their home. And in the book, we contrast this map with a map created by the Eviction Lab, which is the smaller map over here. This is based at Princeton University. And the Eviction Lab's goal is to present a national picture of the eviction crisis. And I should say at the outset, this is a worthy goal and a valuable project. I'm not criticizing the project. What I'm trying to call attention to is the difference in terms of process, which is substantial. So you could take a look at this map, this one over here, which depicts the whole country of the United States. And you might think, oh, they're working with seemingly bigger data, right? And I'm looking at what is seemingly a more comprehensive picture of the problem of eviction in the United States. They significantly undercount evictions because if you are working in the real estate industry, and your business is to resell homes, it is not in your interest to count any more evictions than you have to. But working instead with local tenants' rights organizations, the AEMP has gathered messier, but actually much more accurate and more contextualized data that documents a greater extent of the problem at hand. This is because they actually hear from tenants who say, help me, I'm being evicted. And it may not be that they are served with an official notice of eviction that you need to get by going to the local government, filling out a form, et cetera. And maybe just that like the landlord hasn't fixed their toilet for 2 months or is lurking in their lobby, or all the other ways in which you can get someone to move out without actually formally beginning eviction proceedings. So just one more thing. Data feminism principles apply not only to collecting data or even analyzing data, but also visualizing and communicating data. So one of the key contributions of feminist thinking is to dismantle false binaries. So feminist philosophers start with a gender binary, but as we say, behind a binary, there's always a hierarchy, and the gender binary with men on top and non-binary folks erased. This one is no different. But there are many other false binaries that are gendered and show up in our work. So you might think of the false binary between reason and emotion. And this goes back to the early Enlightenment, when there actually was a gendered valence to this idea that sort of only men were capable of exhibiting reason and women fell on the emotional side. And clearly in this binary, right, this division, the hierarchy is that reason is somehow better than emotion. And in the book, we use the two charts that you see here, this periscopic visualization, it's actually an animated visualization of gun deaths in the United States, versus this bar chart here that was shown in the Washington Post, using actually very similar data. But we use these two charts in order to show how emotion has really been exiled from data communication, thanks to Edward Tufte mostly. But both feminist philosophy and visual information visualization research have shown how emotion is actually central to perception, to recall, to learning, to understanding, all of these things. There's all sorts of user studies to back this up. So this just brings me to the final sort of major point that I want to make before the Q&A, which may already be obvious from these examples, but it's that data feminism insists on an expanded definition of data science. So the data science that we describe in the book isn't defined by the size of the data set or by the credentials of the people undertaking the work, because these concerns are continually used to exclude women and people of color from the field, as well as to exclude work that makes a contribution that is socio-technical rather than purely technical or methodological. But if we expand our definition of data science, then we can clearly see that some of the most exciting work in the field today is being undertaken by artists, by journalists, by humanists, by community organizers, and by activists. And some of this work actually does look like traditional data science. And so here we want to give a shout out to Margaret Mitchell and her team at Google for their research on bias and natural language processing. That's the paper that you see on the far left. But then right here in the middle, you see something entirely different. This is an interactive AI sculpture by the artist Stephanie Dinkins. And she trained it sort of like an Alexa, but it was trained on an intergenerational dialogue between Black women and her family. And so when you interact with it, you get a very specific conversation, and intentionally so. And then on the right, you see in a sort of more fun data visualization project, some data journalism by The Pudding, which examines gender bias in Hollywood screenplays. And then down here, this is actually a mural by the group Data Therapy. They work with community-based organizations to create what they call data murals for their own communities. And we have actually hundreds of examples like this in the book, which we selected to sort of illustrate our points and inspire our readers. But what we were doing when we were picking these examples was to sort of try to hold two different things in our hands. Because on the one hand, we recognize that data is at the root of so many problems today, but we also believe very firmly and very strongly that when data is wielded intentionally and with care and with attention to the lives and the people that it represents. So just to sum up, here are some of the main takeaways of data feminism that we talk about in the book. Data feminism is a data science that sort of at its core exposes and challenges power. It's led by and centers minoritized people. It can function as a counter data science about the injustices created by mainstream data science. It, in many cases, functions in this way. It looks at many axes of inequality, including but not limited to gender, race, and class. It considers process and thinks about how inequality permeates all stages of a data science project, from asking the research questions to how you get funding to conduct the research to how that project is deployed. And then it credits the labor involved in data work, acknowledging how data science is the work of many hands. And so more concretely, here are some things that you can do if you sort of want to inhabit these principles or take them to your workplace or wherever it is that you do your data work. So do work that interrogates and exposes sexism, racism, and other forces of oppression. Examine how these forces show up in data and in the world. You can collect counter data and missing data, like in some of the projects that we've seen. You can introduce new communities to data science. You can use data to advocate for equity at your institution. You can experiment with creative forms of data presentation and communication. We've seen some of these, but they also include quilts, sculptures, VR, fashion shows. You can include more people in data-driven projects, especially impacted communities. And then you can make sure you credit your sources and your research support staff. Make your process transparent and reflect on your own identity. So that's all I've got for the presentation. Again, sort of here's the book. It's available online if it looks interesting to you. And you can also learn more about both my work at my website, Catherine's work at her website. We both run research labs, which you can see the URLs here. We're on Twitter, GitHub, Instagram, what have you. So yeah, so thanks so much for listening.